And so to conclude our afternoon's, our religious liberty programming this afternoon, we have one of our local church members, Chris DiCicco. I'd like to invite him to come out here. And Chris, well, you can introduce yourself. I came to visit Chris at his home about 2 months ago, and I was astonished at what I saw. He has a small farm just a few miles north of here, and Chris is going to share with us what he and his family did and some of the spiritual lessons that they learnt through that process. So, do you mind if I pray with you, Brother Chris, before we start? All right. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing Brother Chris and his family into our church family. Father, I want to thank you for the way you've led them as a family. Lord, what they have done has been very much under the radar, but it's been in your plans. And Lord, I want to thank you now for this testimony. I pray, Lord, that as Chris shares, I know there's been a lot of time in the preparation for this presentation. Father, I ask that you will speak through him to us, that the lessons each one of us need to learn about end-time living, that they will be impressed upon our hearts. We will not just think about it, but we will be doers of what we hear. So, Father, speak through him now. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, as Dr. Vine has introduced me, my name is Chris, and Dr. McCullough was talking about his calling in his field. Well, I feel like I've been called into the field. And as a farmer usually does when they get to work, I'm going to roll up my sleeves because, boy, it's hot up here. So what I'm going to take you through, I know I have a limited time, and I'm going to try to get through as much of it as I can. But what I'm going to take you through is what we do at Sowers MicroFarm. And then we're going to kind of explore some of the basic ideas of agriculture, whether you're interested in farming at our scale, because who knows, some of you might be, but whether you're interested in that or whether you're interested in home-scale food production, we're going to cover some of the basics of that. And then we're going to go into the spiritual lessons and implications in the context of religious liberty and what working the soil means. This is my wife, Heather, and we love to eat. How many of you guys love to eat? All right, well, we eat straight from the garden, just how God has designed it. I grew up in a family that loved to garden. My parents always had a garden. My grandmother always had a garden, and there's nothing better than eating straight from the garden as God provides it. These are our boys from left to right. Asher, Hawk, and Rylan. And we own and operate Sowers MicroFarm just up the road here in Benton Harbor, Michigan. We're a 4-season, diversified microfarm, which means we grow all kinds of stuff, from spinach, beans, radishes, daikon radishes, all kinds of specialty crops, garlic, beets, zucchinis, summer squash, cucumbers, all kinds of tomatoes. Everybody loves tomatoes. All kinds of peppers, specialty potatoes like fingerling potatoes, carrots, mustard greens, all kinds of Asian greens. We like to eat greens at our house. Swiss chard, kale, celery, salad turnips, salad crops, which are our most popular crops by far. They're also for us the most profitable crops. Chinese cabbage, cauliflower, scallions, heirloom tomatoes, which is even more of a specialty crop, herbs, and all kinds of stuff that you've probably never even heard about before. Yes, we're that farm. We have 20 acres, and this is what I want you to wrap your mind around. We have 20 acres, but we're only farming 1.5 acres. And you're probably wondering right now, well, what defines a microfarm? Well, there's several definitions, but basically the whole idea is to make efficient production on a small footprint. So we do not have a tractor, number one. No tractor. We have a walk-behind tractor, which I'll get to in a minute. But the idea is to with intensive plant spacings and biological intensity, we are trying to get the most bang for our footprint. So we're producing tons and tons of food on a small footprint, and that's kind of example of that. That's the ground level. There's Hawk watering in some crops. So the idea is that we're turning over these beds 2 and sometimes 3 times per growing season. And the other definition, going hand in hand with the footprint, is most of what we do is human scale. Now, what do I mean by human scale? We use our hands. Whether we're building beds, or we're direct seeding crops, or transplanting. And you can see here, this is a good example of our intensive plant spacings. There's Ryland planting some peppers, and there are 2 rows of pepper on a 30-inch bed. So then all of our beds are standardized, 100 foot long by 30 inches wide. All of our cultivation chores are done with highly specialized tools that are actually designed for this type of agriculture. So most of our hand tools, that's our shed a little bit with our tools. All of our harvest is done by hand. Sometimes not just on our hands and knees, but laying down. All of our washing and packing is done by us, by a small farm crew of, 6 people? Those are heirloom tomatoes out for restaurant deliveries. So we do have mechanical advantage in some instances. This is our walk-behind tractor. I forgot to mention that DiCicco is Italian. This tractor's from Italy. The walk-behind tractor, the BCS, we have several implements that we use to work the soil. One is our power harrow, which preps a seed bed so that we can transplant and direct seed. And you can see the nice job it does there. We have a rotary plow, and that rotary plow is excellent for when our soil settles. We use permanent raised beds, which means we try not to walk on them during the growing season, and we try not to disturb except for the top 3 inches of the soil. So we're a minimum till operation, and the rotary plow actually kicks the walkway soil up on top of the pathway. So we try to disturb the biology as little as possible. We also have a flail mower, which is useful for cutting down cover crops, which we'll get into later. And a compost spreader. And man, let me tell you, this machine here, this compost spreader is so much more efficient and effective and saves my back from doing it with a wheelbarrow, I'll tell you. It makes short work. In fact, on one pass of a bed, I can lay down 1 inch of compost. So I make a living doing this, and I'm not expecting that all of you are going to drop your job and quit your job and start a microfarm like ours. And the way that we make a living is in 3 ways. First is our CSA. These are our CSA boxes. For those of you who aren't familiar with the CSA, what a CSA stands for is Community Supported Agriculture, and we rely heavily on our community. In the wintertime, when we don't have crops necessarily to sell, we start our membership campaign. And in that campaign, we're asking our members to pay up front for what we produce over the course of the season. And every week during the course of the season, each member receives at whatever level they've bought in at, whether it be a full share or a half share, into what the farm produces on a weekly basis. And every week, we try to make it different. And it is different based on what's coming due in the gardens at any particular time. And then we have our drop sites. And one of the drop sites that we have here is in Berrien Springs, Michigan, at Neighbor to Neighbor parking lot on Fridays. The other drop site is the farm, so our members come and pick up their shares at the farm as well. We also have an online store, and we service both of those places with our online store as well. We have 13 local area restaurants on our fresh sheet from week to week. Now, we don't service all those restaurants at one time, but the idea is we send a text message to our chefs on a Wednesday night. They get their orders in by Thursday morning at 8 a.m. We harvest, wash, pack, and deliver to their kitchens on Thursday afternoons. Amazon.com cannot beat that. We also open the farm 2 days a week on Fridays and Sundays for our local traffic. Now, the other thing that I really want to mention is that we made an intentional decision not to go to farmers markets because we feel like it's more important for us to serve our local community. So we're all about staying home. So we transform our production area, which you see here, into our market stall where we sell to our on-farm customers on a weekly basis. And we serve hundreds and hundreds of people on a weekly basis in this local community. So now I want to get into some of the basics. Now, I mentioned that you're not all going to be wanting to drop your jobs and start a microfarm because I'm testament that it is a lot of work. But it's so rewarding, growing your own food. And if those of you who have grown your own food, I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about. The grocery store pales in comparison. So let's jump into some of the things that are important to consider for home production. First of all, you need to develop a plan, start where you are, and use what you have. Those who are faithful in little will be faithful in much. This is our backyard at our city house in Benton Harbor. When we bought that house, the first thing I did was start landscaping and developing my plan for food production. And this is what I decided to do. The great thing about raised beds is you don't need any equipment. You need a shovel, a wheelbarrow, and your hands, and what God has given you in your mind. So I immediately set the beds in the perfect location, filled them with soil that I actually bought from a landscape company, a local landscape company, and we started growing. And this is an example of a mature garden. This is in the summertime. It's probably about August. So at our city house, we were able to grow and preserve and use what we grew ourselves in our yard, in our garden, at every meal throughout the year. At least 3 items, whether it was dried herbs, it was fresh harvested, or it was canned tomatoes. So that is the capability that you have. You can grow a lot of food in a small space. Well, during this time, I was looking for a new job. I'm not trained as a farmer. I have no educational background in farming or agriculture. Zero, zip, none whatsoever. This is the book that someone handed me and said, you should check this out. Well, it's by J.M. Fortier, the market gardener, a successful grower's handbook for small-scale organic farming. And I read this book in about 3 days, and I ran to Heather and I said, honey, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. And after much deliberation and prayer, we were planning to homestead, which didn't work out. And unfortunately, due to time limitations, I can't go into all those stories, but God's fingerprints were all over this. And, as they will be when you grow your own food in your own backyard. It's amazing. So we landed on our current property, and I started a test garden, and it failed miserably. Our soil was one level above beach sand. And I said, Lord, what are you doing, bringing us out into the wilderness to kill us? He obviously didn't do that. So after much prayer and research and deliberation and a soil test, which is another important thing to have, we found out we didn't have any organic matter in our soil. Sandy mineral soil is great at draining quickly, but it's also great for not holding nutrients for any length of time. So all our plants were yellowing, they didn't get any kind of nutrition, there was no biology in the soil to add anything of value. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But so I made a phone call to Andrews University Dairy, and we started a convoy of sending trucks from the dairy for composted cow manure, and we lined them up along the street. And I tell you what, people were smelling, and they were watching. So at the time, I was working at a photo studio or a video studio on a video crew. I did lighting and electrical for several production companies locally. So every time I came home, every chance I got, I took out the wheelbarrow, I measured out all of our beds, and I got busy with the shovel and the stink and started making beds. So this is about the end of that first year that we owned our current property. And this is the following year, and it worked. Hallelujah. This is our footprint that first season. This represents about a little over a third of an acre that we had in production that first season. Okay, the next thing you're going to want to look at for your garden, whether you're at scale like we are or you're just wanting a couple of raised beds, is your sun exposure. You need a minimum of 6 to 8 hours per day. That's a minimum. Fruiting crops like tomatoes need much more. 10 hours is ideal. But the great thing is that God's creation is reliable and ordered. You can put your garden in a specific area and know that if it gets sun there for 10 hours a day, it's going to happen that same way next year and the year after and after. What I would suggest is getting a tracker or compass app. This is what I use. It's Sunseeker for iPhone. And what it does is it gives you the trajectory of the path of the sun across the sky throughout the whole year. Another great aspect to the app, it takes a lot of memory off your phone, so you got to turn it off right away so you don't drain your battery. But it uses your phone's camera in a 3D mode, so you can go out into your yard or out into your property, and you can see where the sun's going to be at the 21st of December, which is the shortest day, or the 21st of June, which of course is the longest day of the year, and everything in between. The next thing you need to identify is that you need to observe your garden on a daily basis. Your garden will be beautiful, I guarantee it, but it requires your active, daily participation. God designed nature to be full of those spiritual lessons. As it is in the garden, so it is in your heart. And those big words on the screen, I couldn't say it better myself. It requires your active, daily participation. So does our relationship with God. So at our city garden, I would always visit. I was always in the garden. If I wasn't working on the house, I was in the garden. I'd visit the garden twice a day, once in the morning before I went to work, and then once when I came home. And then I usually would spend at least a half hour to an hour out there just observing what's happening. And when you see what's happening in the garden and how that garden transforms and changes on a day-to-day basis, whether it be flowers blooming or fruit setting, it gives you a deeper appreciation for God and His creation and the works that He's made. It's also a great opportunity to get accustomed to the rhythms of the season. To everything, there's a season. That's right. And the garden is definitely a way to observe that. You'll also be able to identify pest pressures or diseases or combat or stop in their tracks the weeds that will grow. And there's a lesson there too. You need to also evaluate your gardening goals. How much food do you want to produce? You need to do your research and you need to count the cost, depending on what approach you're wanting to take in your garden. There's so many approaches. If you asked 100 gardeners what's the best approach, they'd give you 10,000 answers. You need to find out what's right for your situation. The great thing about raised beds, like I mentioned before, is you don't need a lot of expensive tools. You need hand tools and a willingness to work. There's the Back to Eden method that requires wood chips. There's the traditional gardening method by using a rototiller. There's no-till, there's low-till, there's sheet mulch gardening. So you need to determine what's right for you in your context, and you need to develop your plan. If you're not familiar with gardening, or even if you are, or if you're interested in in-home food production, this is a book that I would highly recommend, The Backyard Homestead. It's full of all kinds of helpful information, and it surveys a broad variety of topics, from starting how to plan a garden across the seasons. It shows how to can, how to preserve herbs, how to dehydrate your food. It gives you ideas on how to, or what goat breeds are good for milk, what chickens are good for eggs. So it's really a practical guide. In the first page, when you open it, the first leaf of the book's how much food can you produce? And this is on 1/10 of an acre. It gives you a diagram and shows you the breakdown on a yearly basis of what you can produce. The second, on 1/4 acre, and then on 1/2 acre. It's full of tons of useful knowledge. So highly recommended. Not only do you need an overarching garden design plan, but you can see the empty beds on the left-hand side of the screen. You're also going to need a yearly crop plan. This is a crop plan that I developed based on our city garden. I drew it out on graph paper. Most people are familiar with a summer garden. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, etc., sweet corn, melons. Did you know that at our latitude, you can plant seeds in the garden at the end of March as soon as you can work the soil? You can grow beets, you can grow lettuce, you can grow Swiss chard, you can grow snow peas. There's a whole host of other things that you have an opportunity to grow if you're willing to do the research and figure things out. This was our summer garden. And typically at our latitude, it's about Mother's Day when you're able to plant out those summer heat-loving crops without threat of frost. Those are your crops, like I mentioned: tomatoes, eggplants, cucumbers, beans, sweet corn, things of that nature. And then about the end of July, early August is when you prepare for your fall garden. And that fall garden, you're switching back to some of the greens, some of the cooler growing crops that you can grow that will tolerate frost. And then it was at our city house that I started to experiment with winter growing. This was our design for our first year of winter growing. And this is what the garden looked like in the winter. Now, one of the drawbacks to having small caterpillars like that is the heat and cold, the temperature spikes are too wild. So if you're going to grow over the course of a longer season, you're going to need to think about a bigger structure. But the ideas and techniques for winter growing can be found in this book by Elliot Coleman, The 4-Season Harvest. And basically the idea is that you're growing your crops to maturity before you lose light. And at our latitude here in Michigan, it's about mid-September. And by mid-September, your crops will be at maturity. And if you cold protect them all winter long, you can fresh harvest all winter long. And that's what we do at our farm. I'd also like to point you to an Adventist company out of Middle Tennessee. This is Farmer's Friend. If any of you know the Dysinger family, you will know that Jonathan Dysinger is the owner of Farmer's Friend. Great products. We own 3 of their high tunnels. One we've converted into a double poly greenhouse for our heirloom tomatoes. They have all kinds of products that we use on our farm: silage tarps, insect netting, sandbags, and a bunch of other tools. Helpful, very helpful. Great service, great product, great price. We also use our high tunnels for summer growing because we're out in an area where there's a lot of commercial production. There's a lot of disease pressures that are mainly airborne. And if we can keep the moisture off of our cucumbers and our field tomatoes, the high tunnel really helps to mitigate some of those disease pressures. Now, I showed you the crop plan for our city garden. This is a whole nother level. This is our crop plan at the farm. You can see on the left-hand side, that's basically our, totally lost that one. What was it? Our game plan, that's right. All right, our game plan. And our game plan is basically an evaluation of what worked last season, what didn't work, and how we're going to tweak our system for this next year so that we can make it better and be more productive. So we push all of those ideas, whether it be, for instance, we need more salad crops, and we need to grow them on a weekly basis. We list that on the left side, and then we push it through the spreadsheet on the right side. That gets translated. You can see here, there's a lot of moving parts. I know it's not going to make sense, but some of the things that are included in this crop plan, spreadsheets make my head spin. I got to get to crop planning after this weekend. So basically, on the left column are the crops we're growing, and the green column is when they get seeded. There's all kinds of useful information: the days to maturity, how long they're going to be in the garden, how many plug flats we need to seed of each flat, where they go in the gardens, how long the harvest window is, and when they come out. So a lot of moving parts. This is an example. After we get all of that information in our calendars, then we translate that into our overall plan. And this is super helpful. I use this on a daily basis, and at any one time I can get a bird's eye overhead view of what is happening on the farm throughout the growing season. Each of these blocks represent either a crop that's coming in, going out, or a task that has to happen in the garden. You can see the calendar on the margins there. I liken it to writing a musical score for a symphony. When we have the heat of the season, there's no time for us to think about planning. We have to have all of those things planned out ahead of time, because the growing season is fast and furious, and we have to have a plan already stated, and we got to stick to the plan. I can't think in spreadsheet language, so I have to operationalize. Now that may not make sense to you, but that's our biweekly task list on the farm. There's a lot of work to do. Every garden needs a nursery, but not all seeds are the same. First the blade, then the ear, then the fruit. I want to direct you to another Adventist company. This is Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds out of Mansfield, Missouri. Jared Gettle goes all over the world, and he collects heirloom or open pollinated seeds. Now, what open pollination means is that the offspring of the parent stock faithfully represents the traits of the parent. So those seeds are passed on from generation to generation. Johnny's seeds that's our go-to catalog for seeding. You can learn a lot of information looking through a Johnny's seed catalog. They provide cultural information on how to grow each crop, but they also provide, on the bottom right, you can see a chart of each variety that does well throughout the growing season. Not all varieties like the heat, not all varieties like the cold. And Johnny's conveniently adds which varieties do and which varieties don't. F1 hybrids are what we use a lot of on our farm. Now, F1 hybrids are not genetically modified organisms. Do you all remember Gregor Mendel, the Czech monk who experimented with peas? No? It might have been middle school science, but he's kind of known as the father of modern genetics. Now, I want to talk about genetically modified seeds for a minute, okay? Genetically modified seeds are made in a laboratory by gene editing and gene sequencing, and most often those sequences are taken out of kind. Do you all know what I mean when I talk out of kind? You're not taking a corn genetics and splicing it into a corn genome. You're taking a bacterium gene or a gene sequence, and you're splicing it into a corn genome. That's out of kind. God didn't make it that way. We have no idea what genetically modified organisms do in the human body because God didn't design it that way. F1 hybrids are different. They're basically the Gregor Mendel experiment. The traits from the parent stock are bred together to select for traits that are desirable for your particular use. For example, disease resistance, uniformity of size, or reliability in production. So it's a plant sexual reproduction based on the way God made it. And that's what we use a lot at our farm. This was our summer garden and our seeding regimen for our summer crops in our city garden. You can see there's not a whole lot that we had. Our heirloom tomatoes, some cucumbers and summer squash, some peppers, and I think maybe some flowers. It's a whole lot different at Sowers Purse. This is our seed order for a year. Because we do so much seeding over the course of the season, we have to be efficient in our production. This is our seed bench. On the top, you can see our plug flats, and underneath on the left is our grow media in a wheelbarrow. Because we have so many seeds to plant on a weekly basis, we employ a vacuum seeder. That's the aluminum plate you see there. And basically, the vacuum pressure sucks the seeds onto the plate. We flip it over onto our seed flat and drop 128 or 72 seeds all at once, so we can seed one flat in a matter of seconds. And when we have this many flats to fill on a weekly basis, it makes a huge, huge difference. Before we had our propagation house, we started our summer crops in our walk-in cooler. We converted our walk-in cooler to our seed nursery or our seed starting room. And if you were to grow at home, you don't really need much. You need some soil media, some plug flats, and either some LED lights or some fluorescent lights. And you can start your seeds for your summer garden inside. Then when the weather stabilizes a little bit more, we take them out. We used to take them out into the high tunnel where we'd store them until the threat of frost was gone, and then they'd get transplanted out into the garden. But now that we have the propagation house, and this is one day's worth of seeding at the farm, we take those seeds from the bench out into the propagation house. The great thing about the propagation house is that it's automated. It's heat and cool controlled so that our plants, our seedlings, have ideal conditions. And that means I don't have to worry about it. I can go do something elsewhere while the seeds are happily growing in the propagation house. Once they come to maturity, and we seed on a weekly basis from about mid-February through the end of August, The seed plugs go out onto the porch, is what we call the porch, which they get hardened off to acclimatize to the conditions in the garden. Irrigation is critical, and nothing really touches the magic of rainfall. Your garden's going to need about an inch of rain per week. One man plants, another man waters, but God really brings the increase. This was our irrigation setup at our city house. We had a simple sprinkler spike, a garden hose, and a battery-operated irrigation timer. We could set it and forget it. And I calculated with a rain gauge, which was a couple bucks at a hardware store, how much water we were putting on that ground during the week. It's a little different at the farm. This is our irrigation pump house. It goes from the irrigation ditch all the way to the corner of the barn, where we have a sediment filter and then a diversion valve that we can send water to our east or our west field blocks. We use two types of irrigation. One is drip irrigation. Drip irrigation is highly, highly efficient. No water gets lost in evaporation, and you don't get your plant leaves wet. The great thing about drip tape is that once it's installed, we leave it in the gardens. This is some drip tape getting installed into one of our high tunnels. The other thing we do with most crops that have drip tape is if they're going to be in the garden any more than 60 days, we usually use landscape fabric so that we don't have to worry about our cultivation chores. We also have overhead irrigation, and overhead irrigation is highly useful for direct seeding crops and also our transplanting crops. And it's really nice to run through the irrigation lines when it's super hot out. Okay, there's a huge difference between fertilizing plants and feeding the soil. When it comes to soil fertility, feeding the microbial life and nutrient cycling is the goal. Okay, I want you to listen to this, guys. The foundation of God's law is love. Everything in nature and the moral law harmonize in an infinite cycle of giving. One way to give back to your soil in terms of fertility and feeding the microbes is chickens. Chickens produce what? Well, eggs and manure. We used chicken manure at our city house. I built a small chicken house. We had 4 hens, and I would use the chicken manure and the bedding to top dress all of our gardens or all of our beds in that system. The other nice thing about a small system is that once you get it up and running, you can recycle all the inputs right from your yard. I used to clip the grass clippings, top dress the beds with grass clippings, and compost, which if we didn't feed the chicken scraps to the chicken, or our table scraps to the chickens, it went on our compost pile. So everything gets recycled in that system. It's a little bit different on the farm. We still use chicken manure, pelletized, which you see here on the beds, and we also use compost, which we really don't have the time or volume or effort. It takes a lot of effort to make good compost. We buy both of those things for the farm because we don't have the time to make them. And here's where it gets interesting. This is our cover crop seed cocktail for our winter beds. Now, cover crops do a number of things for the garden. They provide living tissue on the soil at all times. And it's actually that photosynthetic process that actually feeds the microbes in the soil. When photosynthesis happens, certainly the plants are drawing up nutrient solution from the ground that are released by the microbes in the soil because plants don't have a digestive system. It's the microbes that actually digest what's available in the soil. And then in exchange, the plants send complex carbohydrates and sugars back down to the root zone, which feeds the microbes. So there's that never-ending cycle of giving. Now, different cover crops do different things for the soil. And this is one of my favorites, Sudan grass or sorghum. You can see in the right-hand picture, I'm squeezing something out of the seeds. That's the seed milk. Now you know when the cover crop is ready to cut because the seeds are in the milk phase. And what that really means is that all the plant's energies have come from the ground, and they're all in process of setting a fruit harvest for the plant. That's when all the nutrients are at the top of the plant. So that's our cue to mow them down. Now what that does is it not only creates a lot of biomass, but it also creates a compost that we can leave on the soil, which will become available for the following crop. That is the beauty of nutrient cycling. And this is the most cost-effective to amend your soil by growing your inputs in place. We also do the same for the crops that are finished in the garden. We mow those down with the flail mower, and then we cover them with silage tarps, which can also be purchased through Farmer's Friend. Now, the great thing about silage tarps is it does a number of things. It blocks the light from the soil, which creates a dark space where weed seeds can germinate, and because they have no light, they die. So that's a great thing, number one. The second thing that it does is it allows the biology to take cover. All the worms come up, and the biology over the course of a 2-week season, or a 2-week the 2 weeks that we have the silage tarp on the ground, the biology comes up and digests those residues, which turns it back into good soil. So once we remove the silage tarps, we prep the beds, and then we plant back into them. We try to have all of our beds by the end of the season cover cropped. It's not always possible, but that's the goal. So that's nutrient cycling, and those are some of the basics. Now what I want to move into is, in the context of religious liberty, what this means. Operating a microfarm in an era of food insecurity is not. It's not aligning with Christian nationalism. Now, Christian nationalism is kind of the antithesis of the Marxist and woke ideologies that are pervading our culture today. Both of those systems use coercive and legislative pressures to silence, if not eliminate, opposition. And that's not how God's government works. God speaks the truth in love and leaves everyone free to be fully convinced in their own mind. What we really want to align with is Abraham. Now, Abraham was called by God out of his luxuriant slumber in Ur of the Chaldees, and God took him on a journey. And Abraham sojourned through a land that he didn't know, and he was looking for a city whose builder and maker is God, wherein dwells what? Righteousness. Operating a microfarm in an era of food insecurity is not about aligning with green ideology. Green ideology at its core holds the value of human non-impact as its highest goal. You can think about what the ramifications of that are. But in essence, green ideology is not what we want to align with. Biblical stewardship is much different. It's much more comprehensive with how God runs his universe. Now, granted, it's not about subjugating and abusing creation. On the contrary, it's about preserving it. God told Adam and Eve to dress and keep the garden. So it's not about aligning with green ideologies. And it's certainly not aligned with doomsday prepping. You've all seen the doomsday preppers, and you've heard of the doomsday prepper show on TV. It's not about that. That's an isolationist mentality. And if we're called to be salt and light, we're not supposed to be keeping our gunpowder dry, as if stockpiling guns and ammunition and meals ready to eat in a bomb shelter is going to save anyone or provide any kind of safety in a world that's going mad with demonic delusion. What we really want to do in the garden is get to know the works of the Lord. Psalm 111:2, the works of the Lord are great, sought out of all them that have pleasure therein. Now, what are the works of the Lord? There's the work of his mouth, his word. We traditionally think about two. And the work of his hands, creation. But I'd like to challenge you with a third. It's the work of his Spirit. And the work of his Spirit happens in the human heart that's open to his leading. And when you have all three of those together, the word, creation, and the work of the Spirit guiding you, then we're coming back to what God's original design was. And gardening, if you think of this, gardening is operational participation in God's original design protocol for reality. Are you with me? When God created Adam and Eve in his image as image bearers of his character, he placed them in the garden. Well, what happened in the garden? It was a place for them to get to know God and for God to get to know them. He amply provided for all of their needs in the garden. And he gave Adam and Eve useful work to accomplish, to dress and keep the garden. And why? He wanted Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That means sharing the knowledge of God with their family and by extension, reflecting his character and the methods of his government throughout the whole earth. That, brothers and sisters, is our mission. Now, God is the creator, and his original design was for an agri-lifestyle for Adam and Eve. So as we've seen, it's an integration of all those aspects of God's original design. The Word, his creation, and his Spirit. There's an innumerable amount of health benefits from working in the garden. Number one, you're out in the fresh air. Number two, you're getting plenty of sunshine. Number three, you have to drink lots of water, otherwise you'll dehydrate. You're eating the best quality food that you can get. There's nothing like going out your back door and harvesting your dinner or your lunch and munching while you go. In fact, there's only twice that I've been sick starting the farm. Once was getting COVID in El Salvador, and once was a tropical cold on our vacation in Costa Rica. But since we've had the farm for 6 years, I haven't been sick at all. Conrad's back there telling me, you got 6 minutes. Because we work from the ground, we have a direct line on dependence on God for our living. There's nothing like that. Yes, when you go out to work, God is still providing for you, but there's a straight line to the garden. There's also his wisdom that we have to seek when we have hard problems that come up. And there's spiritual lessons that are built into the work. I'm telling you, Jesus' parables were agricultural for a reason. It's designed into the very work. There's also stewarding his creation. And there's a difference in that word dominion from a worldly perspective and from a godly perspective. Dominion in the world means to subjugate and advance and to be over. But dominion in God's government is to lift up. There's also the discipleship of family. Our home is the center of our farm. And when Jesus is the center of our home and the work that we are able to accomplish, there's so many blessings that come from that. My relationship with my wife has deepened. We serve each other in a much deeper way than we ever would have before. Our boys, all three of them, have grown up in the garden, and they've been able to learn things about just seeing the whole process from start to finish. They're able to gain respect for the things that God has created. They learn the value of what it means to apply themselves to their work. We started them out early with age-appropriate work to do. And now they're still brothers, so they still squabble, and they still have their differences. But they're able to participate as a family, and we incentivize their work because their work in the garden, they're learning things that they will never learn in a classroom. They learn that sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable. Sometimes they have to delay their desires in order to make the goal happen for our family and for our customers. We have a good time, of course, and we cooperate in a way that bonds us together. There's nothing, I've not found anything more valuable and more meaningful than setting your hands to useful work with people that you love. And that's the Village Church mission for a lot of the mission projects that happen here. And also, they get to serve their community. Like I said, people are watching, and we can minister to a much wider sphere of influence than we ever thought possible. And that service is meant for us to transform our characters as we do the work. So operating a microfarm in an era of food insecurity is seeking out and taking pleasure in the works of the Lord through His word, His creation, and His Spirit. And it's about operational participation in an agri-lifestyle, integrating the knowledge of those works. Now in John 15, Jesus was speaking to His disciples, and He said to them, I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends. A servant doesn't know what his Lord's doing. He said, I have not chosen you, or you have not chosen me, but I have chosen you to produce fruit. And that's the purpose of applying yourself to growing food. To produce fruit in your life through these experiences that aren't integrated in any other way that I've found. And it's about letting your light shine in your community and living the principles of that kingdom. In the context of religious liberty, as we've been exploring all Sabbath long, we recognize that liberty is being challenged, and the light of liberty is under threat of going out. But Paul says in 2 Corinthians 3:17 that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's liberty. And whether religious freedom goes out in the world or in America, if the Spirit of the Lord dwells here, it will never, ever grow out. Amen. There's a couple of things that I want to show you real quick. Born Again Dirt. This is a great resource for those of you who are interested in Christian farming or Christian agriculture. It's by Noah Sanders. Lots of great principles. Number 2, Hope in the Soil by Ellen White. It's a compilation of her writings on agriculture, farming, and gardening. It's been very encouraging to me and our family and our journey. And this is the Adventist Agricultural Association website. They're actually having a conference in Glen Rose, Texas, January 17th through the 21st. So adventistag.org is where you want to go. Also, here's my email. We're planning on putting together a 2-day intensive at the farm, a training course to provide you with much more in-depth information on home-scale food production and microfarming. So if you're interested, please contact me, and we'll further the conversation within the next few weeks. Conrad?
So
Okay.
I'm sure we've all been blessed by this presentation, yes? And we're all thinking back to if we have a little plot of land somewhere, thinking, how many greenhouses can I get on that? And how many children can I enroll in slave labor? So, we've been blessed by this presentation. I was really challenged by the idea of integrating God's creation, His Word, and His Spirit. It's just been a blessing to have this presentation, Chris. And again, if anybody wants to find out more, they can connect with you at this email address.
Absolutely.
If you're thinking running a MicroFarm, connect with Chris, and you can go and spend 2 days over there at the farm and learn about how this is done. So we just want to thank you for your ministry. Thank you for sharing the incredible journey that God has led you on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Conrad.